how to process the forms. We've got an excellent speaker here, Mr. Dan Robinson from down the road, our neighbor, Pace University, to go through everything. And really kind of an exhaustive, let's say, presentation about the Fafsa and other forms as well. So again, I thank you for being here. We are recording this for our folks who cannot join us. We are live as well. So we look forward to a great evening, a thorough evening. Everybody's got some handouts and hopefully something to write with. But we will have this presentation again for those. Right here, we'll have it after tonight as well, and share it with everybody on our counseling site. The Impact High School. You just go on the homepage, there's a counseling page, and we'll post it there. So again, thank you for being here. Take this opportunity to learn more about the Fafsa. Without further ado, Mr. Dan Robinson.
Thank you very much. I'm going to use the mic just for recording purposes. Welcome for coming out tonight, and everyone watching later on, thank you for taking part. I'm going to give you a lot of information in a short period of time. I tend to talk a little fast, but if you have questions, by all means, raise your hand, and I'll be able to address those for you. So we're going to cover a lot of topics, as you can see. We're going to talk about the forms themselves, what is financial aid, some of the common terms, such as cost of attendance, expected family contribution. We're going to get into some special circumstances. Like I said before, spend a lot of time on the forms themselves that you're going to need for the college process. So, what is financial aid? Basically, it's money to help pay for college education. So for the parents in the room, it's to help offset your out-of-pocket expenses for your child's education. Now, the first term you're going to hear often is the cost of attendance for a school. Now, the cost of attendance is made up of both direct and indirect expenses. So the direct expenses is what you should expect to pay to the school. When you get that bill that's due, you'll see here's the tuition, here's the mandatory fees, here's the room, here's the meal plan, if your student's living on campus, of course. And then some schools will also include books and supplies, some schools will not. I tried shifting that between the two in this presentation, I couldn't figure out how to do it, but that's really more in the middle. The indirect expenses are the costs you're going to incur while your child's at college. You're still going to have to get them to and from college, either on a daily basis if they're going to be commuting, or a few times a year if they're traveling any distance. And then miscellaneous expenses. You know, the child's still going to need to, call home and ask for money, etc. So we factor into that cost of attendance approximately how much that will cost you on a yearly basis. So the next term you're going to hear, and this is the last year you're going to be hearing this term, so anyone who's been through the process before, you probably have heard of the EFC, or the Expected Family Contribution. This is a term that comes from the Fafsa, the federal form, which we'll talk about in great detail. Everything's changing, not for this senior class, but next year's senior class. The whole process is changing. The term EFC is finally going away. Because it's really a misnamed term. It's really not what you should expect to pay for college. It's really more of a benchmark number that colleges use, regardless of the cost of the college. That figure actually stays the same for every school. What they use it for is to determine how much financial need you have. So you take that simple math problem, that cost of attendance minus the EFC, and that's what your demonstrated financial need is to attend that school. So as you can see, you look at the schools that are out there, how much they cost, their cost of attendance, that expected family contribution number stays constant regardless of the school the students attending. But what does change, obviously, is the need. So what is financial aid? Where does it come from? What's the different types? The two main types are need-based and non-need-based, and that's primarily based on that calculation we showed just a moment ago. So where's the money coming from, and how are you getting it? The types of financial aid, the ones on the right are what you're really shooting for, scholarships and grants. When we talk about scholarships, we're primarily looking at academic-based scholarships. So the students, a lot of colleges use the student's high school record, whether it's GPA and test scores, but a lot of colleges now, as we know, are test optional, so it's just GPA. They'll look at whether or not AP courses, honors courses, and they look at the whole college profile, not necessarily the high school profile, not just scores per se. So if students on a borderline between a scholarship for $20,000 or $25,000, they may look, okay, their leadership skills, are their clubs and organizations, whatever it might be, and they may be able to boost the scholarship up a little bit. The other types of scholarship are talent-based, which would be athletic, artistic, musical, theatrical, whatever it might be. Those usually require a separate process outside the normal admissions process, which I'll touch on in a few moments. Then we got grants. This is where need comes into play. The calculation for financial need weighs heavily on whether or not a student can be awarded a grant. grant is free money that does not have to be paid back, and it comes from multiple sources. From a lot of colleges, it really comes from the college themselves. On the left-hand side is what's called self-help aid. So we're looking at loans, which I'll get to good detail in a moment, and self-help work study. So students who work on college campuses through the federal work study program, belong to them, but the amount of money they're receiving is actually, most of it's coming from the federal government, and that's why it's considered financial aid. The school's not paying as much per hour as the federal government is, so it's considered financial aid. But really what you're striving for are the scholarships and grants. So where does all this money come from? You got the federal government, the state government, the schools, and then the private resources such as employers and outside organizations. So the federal government is the largest source of financial aid across the country. They do award primarily based on need. They do have 1 or 2 awards that do not require need, which I'll get to. It also includes loans. There's requirements of filing the Fafsa. That's the one requirement of being considered for financial aid. Each year, we have to do the Fafsa each year, and there are eligibility requirements. As we fill out the Fafsa, the student has to be attending as a matriculated student at an authorized school, usually on at least a half-time basis. So here are all the federal aid programs that are out there. The federal Pell Grant is the largest program, and it's directly related to that EFC figure. So this year, if that EFC figure is below, I think it's 6,378, it's always an odd number, the student will qualify for the federal Pell Grant. And it's a sliding scale. The lower the EFC, the higher the Pell Grant. The maximum award this year was $6,845 on the Pell Grant. Jump over the middle one. The Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, commonly known as SEOG, is a pot of money that the federal government gives to the schools to distribute amongst the Pell recipients only as they see fit. Each school sets their own criteria for the SEOG award, with the one major criteria being the student has to be Pell eligible. So if you as a student or your child isn't receiving the federal Pell Grant, there's no way you'll see SEOG in their award notice. But if they have Pell, they may receive SEOG. It all depends on the school's requirement. The one I skipped over, the Iraq-Afghanistan Service Grant, this is the one award that is not need-based. This is for a student who may have lost or a parent or had a parent permanently disabled in the Iraq-Afghanistan conflict. If they have that, if they meet that criteria, the student's awarded a full Pell Grant regardless of anything else on the Fafsa. So it's an automatic full Pell Grant for those students. The other one that doesn't have much of a need component is the Teach Grant, which is kind of a little tricky. The Teach Grant is, as it states, it's for students who are going into teaching. Now, there's requirements involved. The student has to maintain being a major in teaching, going towards an education degree, and beyond graduating, they have to teach in a designated teacher shortage area for a certain number of years, as decided upon by the Federal Department of Education. If they fail to do so, the grant they receive each year has to be paid back as a loan. So a lot of schools that do have education majors choose not to participate in the Teach Grant program. They have that option. So if your child is looking, or the students in the room, if you look to become a teacher, that's one of the questions you want to ask. Do you participate in the Teach Grant program? And if so, you'll be considered for it when you file the Fafsa. The school will guide you through the rest of the process. It's a $4,000 a year grant for the Teach Grant. So if you leave the program, you may have to pay back up to $16,000. Federal work study I spoke to already. And the other two are the loans, the dreaded loans. They're in the news a lot lately, as you know. But for student loans, for undergraduate students, first year, you're eligible for up to $5,500 in the federal loan program. Now, this is where the need component comes back into play. The loan could be deemed subsidized, meaning while you're in school, you do not have to pay back anything on the loan and no interest accrues. So pretty much it's an interest-free loan for 4 years plus a 6-month grace period. If you go on to grad school, it continues to be deferred until you finish. So no interest or principal has to be paid back. The other type of loan for students is called an unsubsidized loan, which if you don't demonstrate financial need, you can get the unsubsidized loan. Same interest rate, same rules as paying back the principal. You don't have to wait. You wait until you graduate, but interest starts building right away. You don't have to start paying until you graduate 6 months after the grace period, and then it kicks in. Any interest that's accrued to that point gets added to the balance of the loan. So you're going to be paying interest really on top of interest. There's no penalty for prepaying these loans early. So if some families want to take it out just to ease the burden initially and then pay that off while the student's in school, that's perfectly fine. Now, the federal PLUS loans that are out there, PLUS stands for Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students. So for the parents in the room, if you need additional funding to help pay for college, the federal government does offer a loan called PLUS. It's a credit-based loan, but it's a very simple credit check. They look at your recent credit history. They don't look at your income. They don't look at your debt. They don't look at your credit score. They look at, are you paying your bills on time, and you have no major red marks on your credit report, such as bankruptcies. If you fit that category, you could be approved, you'll probably be approved for this loan, even if you're unemployed. So it's really kind of scary in that aspect. They market it as a low interest loan for parents, but the interest rate is currently 7.5%, which isn't that low, and they take an origination fee of 4.25% off the top. So it's really not the best option, but for some families who have no other option, it is there for them. Now the state programs I'm going to get into in much greater detail. So for New York State residents, the main requirements is that you have to graduate from a high school in New York State, obviously you're here, and you have to be a resident of New York State for a minimum of 1 year. But I'll get into those programs a little later on. Now the colleges and universities, for private colleges especially, this is the largest source of financial aid between their merit scholarships and need-based grants, endowments, etc. So when you apply to schools, you're automatically considered for the most part for an academic scholarship. And then after everything else is awarded, the schools will say, can we give you any other grant money? Some schools have their own loan program and work programs, so check with the schools. You may get a better rate on a loan if they do participate in the loan program. Most schools use the Fafsa or CSS profile to determine how much financial aid you'll receive from that school. And there are deadlines, strict deadlines. My daughter's a senior this year, so I can understand what you're all going through. We got a mailing the other day from one of the schools, and it said, deadline to file November 1st, big bold letters, no exceptions. So, and we've heard horror stories over the years about no exceptions. Now, outside of the federal, state, and schools, within the community, there are scholarships, and within really not just the local community, but throughout the states. There are scholarship applications online. When you research them, common sense goes a long way. If it seems too good to be true, it usually is. If it asks too much personal information, don't worry about it. There's another scholarship you could look for that may not. Look at the reputable sources. In the handout, there's a couple provided there. Use your Navion system for scholarship search. As they become available in the community, I'm sure your guidance office provides some listings of them as well. So those usually come about in January. January, the new year starts. Start looking for those scholarships. If there are any parents of underclassmen here tonight, start looking, doing the research now, so next year at this time, you'll be ready to go. And then employers, the parents in the room, check with your jobs to find out if they possibly have some sort of reimbursement benefit for your child's college tuition. We normally see this for parents who belong to unions. We'll fill out forms for a lot of the local unions, CSEA, some of the labor unions as well. It may not take effect in the first year or the first semester even, but it could be to the point where once your child's doing well academically, they may say, okay, we can now give your child a scholarship for X number of dollars as long as they maintain a 3.0 GPA. So ask around. The worst thing they could say is no. Can't hurt to ask. So October 1st, it just passed. Other than being my daughter's birthday, important date in this world, the reason we're here is because it was the first day to file your FAFSA as well as other financial aid forms. Although the New York State form was not yet ready on October 1st, it should have been, but I'll get to that. So the FAFSA, as I mentioned, is a free application for federal student aid. In order to sign the FAFSA and get access, every student needs what's called an FSA ID. It's your electronic signature. At least one parent needs an FSA ID to sign the FAFSA. So if you haven't done that already, I'd recommend going home tonight, getting your FSA ID, because it does take 24 to 48 hours to authenticate that you say who you say you are. Because the government goes through the check, they check your social security number, your date of birth, make sure everything matches. It says, okay, your FSA ID is good to go. So when your student logs into the FAFSA, they put in their FSA ID and start the process. At the end of the FAFSA, the parent puts their FSA ID in. So again, free application for federal student aid, first word being free. You do not have to pay to file the FAFSA. We recommend you don't pay anyone to file the FAFSA on your behalf. It collects demographic and financial information for the student and parent. It uses the information to determine that EFC I spoke of, and colleges use that to determine the financial aid. It is available online in both English and Spanish. As of right now, there are no other languages it's available in. We're hoping that it'll expand, but they haven't done that yet. And when can you file this FAFSA? Technically, you have the whole first year of college to file your FAFSA, but you don't want to wait. You want to make sure you have it done early. So a good thing to do is check the dates on the college's websites and what the deadlines are. A lot of times, it correlates with the school's early admission, early decision, early action deadlines as well. They want to make sure everything's in sync. But you can apply for the FAFSA before you apply to a school. So, if there's a school on your wish list, you don't have to put the application in. They're not on the Common App. You don't have to put it in until January 1st. You can still list them on the FAFSA. School will get it, just hold on to it until there's a record to match it up to. But check those deadlines. So anytime now, you can go in and start filing the form. Now, for the student, it looks at the student's legal name as it appears on the Social Security card. You'd be surprised how many errors we get for this. Because if I file my FAFSA as Dan Robinson, it's rejecting, because my legal name is Daniel. It doesn't realize that Dan is short for Daniel. So if you're unsure, take out your child's Social Security card, put everything in exactly how it should be. Make sure you put the right child's Social Security number with the right child. If you have more than one child, you want to put a sibling's Social Security number by mistake, especially if the numbers are close. We've seen that happen often, where siblings have the Social Security numbers 1 or 2 digits off, and the parents make the mistake and put the wrong number on. Looks at the student's citizenship status. To file the FAFSA, you have to be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, meaning you have to have an alien registration number. The FAFSA does not recognize DACA students at this time, but maybe possibly down the line. And then students' marital status. For the most part, we hope that the student, or not hope, but we imagine the students most likely not married coming out of high school. Then it asks a series of dependency questions. The federal government really considers students dependent upon their parents until age 24. There's a series of about 12 or 13 questions. Some are pretty straightforward, whether the student's a graduate student, born before a certain date, if they're in the military, U.S. veteran, etc. Then they get to the ones that are a little more questionable sometimes for some families and some students. If the student is considered an orphan or ward of the court, meaning both parents may be deceased or disabled and they're under a court order. If they're under legal guardianship, now we're all legal guardians of our child, yes, but it's a court-appointed legal guardianship. So if you someone in your household that you're the legal guardian of, then the student is considered independent. Legal guardianship is different from custody in New York State. They're two different distinctions. The other one would be if the student's deemed at risk or is homeless, then the student would be considered independent. If the student's considered independent, parental information is not needed on the FAFSA. And if the student does answer yes to any of these questions, the schools the student's applying to will ask for backup information. They'll need the paperwork to prove that the student is truly independent. So now the financial information. This is really the meat and potatoes of the FAFSA. So it looks at your 2021 tax return. So when you're looking at taxes you just filed a year ago. It looks at the income, the assets, investments, untaxed income, such as your pre-tax contribution to your retirement fund. Your retirement fund that you have is not part of the FAFSA. So you have a 401k, 403b, you don't have to report it. What you do have to report is your pre-tax contribution. So you want to have that tax return and W-2s handy, because that figure is found on your W-2s. So the IRS data retrieval tool is something that's available when you file the FAFSA, and it's highly recommended you use it. FAFSA asks specific questions from your tax return. Tells you, they make it simple. It says, okay, get this information from line 17. But there's also some calculations where you need to get line 17 from page 1, line 23 from schedule 2, minus line 1 from schedule 1. So it gets a little confusing. If you have the opportunity to use the data retrieval tool, it'll pull the information from the tax return directly into the FAFSA, only the information that's needed. So it doesn't have any mistakes involved. What's nice about it, again, it doesn't have any mistakes. Schools won't be confused that something looks like there's an error. If the government selects you for a process called verification, where schools have to collect the data, we don't have to collect tax information if you use the data retrieval tool. If you don't, we need your tax returns. We don't like collecting tax returns. There's too much information on there that is too personal to you, that even though you send it through a secure site, it still seems a little dangerous, so to speak. So if you have it, if you you can use the data retrieval tool, please do. One of the main ways that people are unable to use a data retrieval tool is if you file taxes separately. So if it's a two-parent household and you do not get married filing jointly, you cannot do the data retrieval tool. It can only pull information from one parent's tax return. The student, if you file taxes, by all means use the data retrieval tool, but for the parents, it only pulls in one parent's tax return. If you said married filing separately, it's not going to be able to do that. Married filing jointly is the best way to go. If the parent's single, as long as you filed, anything other than a distinction of married, it'll pull in the information from the IRS as well. So after all that financial information is reported, you get to list the schools on the Fafsa. So this is like the fun part. This is where the student likes, okay, I get to put all my school information in, because as students, again, living at home, my daughter wants nothing to do with the Fafsa. That's my job. But you know what? I have to vote her in because I want to know what school she wants me to send the information to. You can list up to 10 schools at a time. Now, if your child or the students in the room are applying to more than 10 schools, this is where you need to learn to do an electronic juggle. You file the Fafsa with the 10 schools, you make sure it's complete, you make sure those 10 schools receive their electronic copy of it, and then you go back, take schools off, put more schools on, and do the same thing over again, until every school that you're looking at has a copy of the Fafsa. If you need to make a change, you realize you made an error, you got to do that all over again. So try to be as accurate as possible right the first time, especially if you're applying to more than 10 schools. Now, for each school you apply to, it's going to ask what your living arrangement is going to be while on campus. While you're at college, are you going to live on campus, at home, or off campus? If you're unsure, always choose living on campus. It costs more to live on campus, yes, but that raises your cost of attendance, which means it gives you more room to receive financial aid. Schools have the most money to spend in the beginning of the process. If you change your mind, you put down, I'm going to use my school, so we're pretty close distance. Pace is 25 minutes down the road, I'm going to commute. Okay, that's fine. We'll put together financial aid for you as a commuter. Then you decide, in June, July, you know what? I don't want to deal with the Taconic every day. I'm going to live on campus. A grant we might have been able to give you in the beginning, we may not have anymore. Our funds may be exhausted. So always, it sounds bad putting it this way, but it's easier for schools to take money away later than to add money later. We may not have that money to add. Again, each school is going to ask for that information. Obviously, if you're attending a school that doesn't have housing, you would choose, living off campus or with parents. And just a reminder there again that it's a free application. You do not have to pay anybody to do so. Now, it comes to some time to sign. As I mentioned, electronic signatures. The student signs when they log in with their ID. That's their signature already. So when you get to the signature page, the student part's pretty much done for you. It's going to ask the parent to sign. That's when the parent puts in their FSA ID. It asks the question that is all the information true and honest? If not, you can be fined up to $10,000, 6 months in jail, all that stuff. You check I agree, and you move on. If you can't get an FSA ID and you need to sign the Fafsa, or you did it and not authenticating you fast enough, you can print out a signature page. You can still submit all the information electronically, but it will not finalize until they have a signature page received. You print it out, you mail it off to the processing center, I believe it's still in Illinois. It'll take about an extra 2 to 3 weeks to finalize your Fafsa. If you decide for some reason to print out a paper Fafsa and not use any electronic data, it's going to take a good 4 to 6 weeks, if not longer. It's well under less than 1% of Fafsas filed over the last 5 years have been done by paper. So, a lot of room for error on the Fafsa. So these are the most common ones we see. As I mentioned earlier, the student's name and social security number. Make sure you have it right. If you're unsure, take the social security part out. This is where it gets a little tricky now with divorced, widowed, separated parents. I'll go start with the old traditional, household, which really doesn't exist much anymore, is 2-parent household. It's pretty straightforward. It's parents' information on the Fafsa. If the biological parents are no longer together, separated, divorced, widowed, whatever it might be, it's the custodial parent's information that goes on the student's Fafsa. Again, the Fafsa is in the student's name, but the parental information that's provided is for the custodial parent. So it's who the student lives with more often throughout the year is whose information. If it's a true split custody, then it's the parent that provides more financial support. Now, if that parent is remarried, you do have to report the the step-parent's information as well. Regardless of any arrangements you have of financial responsibility, the Fafsa is looking for the household information for the custodial parent. So that would include the step-parent at the time. Now when it comes to household size, it looks at how many people are in that parent's household that the parents provide at least 50% support for. So again, you know a lot of folks who in their household, besides the parents and the children, they may have grandparents living there, aunts or uncles, who the parents are providing for. If that's the case, it's more than 50% support, you list them as part of your household on the Fafsa. It doesn't have to match your tax return. It doesn't correlate to the dependents. They're completely separate from each other. If you're providing for someone, more than 50%, you count them as part of your household. Now as for the number in college, obviously it's the student that you're filling the Fafsa out for, and then if there's any other dependents, this is where the dependents come into play. If there's any other dependents going to college. You as a parent, if you're back in college, you cannot count yourself as in college on your child's Fafsa. So if you're back in school, that doesn't count. If you file a Fafsa yourself, that's a different story. If you have a child attending one of the military academies, that does not count on the Fafsa either, so you wouldn't list that child there. The other mistake we see is real estate value. I skipped over this before because I knew I was going to cover it here. When it asks for the real estate value as part of the investment income, it is not looking for the value of the home you live in. So you could have a multi-million-dollar home in the neighborhood, that doesn't matter. If you have any rental property, vacation homes, etc., it looks for the value of that home minus any debt on it. So I did this presentation the other night, a parent came up and said, I have a little bungalow down on the Jersey Shore, do I have to count that? That's not your primary residence? Yes, you have to count that as part of the investment for real estate on the Fafsa. What you don't count is if you're a small business owner with less than 100 employees, when it asks the question, the value of your business, if you're less than 100 employees, you do not have to answer that question, or you put it in zero. Because a few years back, the government said, we don't want to penalize small business owners who are, pretty much living paycheck to paycheck and reinvesting into their business. So if you own your small business, less than 100 employees, you don't report it, despite the value of the business. It's a quick story from a few years ago. We had a parent who owned a multi-million dollar digital media company and had like 75 employees, and paid himself $30,000 a year on paper. The student got financial aid. It killed us. The value of their home was ridiculous. Everything, it just didn't line up. But everything that they had on the Fafsa was legitimate documents, and but they got financial aid because the company was considered a small business. So you do not report the value of that. Now, when we talk about assets on the Fafsa, I've just skipped over as well. When they look at assets and investments, what they're looking for, what's considered an asset in an investment, other than the rental property, the real estate, is mutual funds, CDs, stocks, stock options, bonds, securities, qualified educational savings accounts such as Coverdale's and 529s. This always throws people off. If you have 529s for the children, for the students, the value of all the 529s in your household, not just for the student who's attending college, gets reported as an investment for the parent, not the student. Because when the government does that calculation for the EFC, anything on the student side, they say more of that money should be going towards their education, which raises the expected contribution. Being this is a savings account that can be used, not necessarily for the child going to college, it can be used for any of your children, it says it's a parental investment. And the government doesn't weigh that as heavily as they do student investment. So if you have the 529s, it's the total value of them in the parent's name. Now, if the 529 is held by someone outside of your house, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, whoever it might be, that is not reported anywhere on the Fafsa. Next year, however, if they use that to help pay for your education, it's considered a gift to the student and has to be reported as untaxed income. So you want to, if they're going to help you pay, wait as long as possible, maybe the senior year of college, that way it's not going to affect you in future years. So if you've got everything in, everything's done, you realize you made a mistake, you have to go back and make a correction. You log back into the Fafsa website, the student signs in with the FSA ID, you make the correction, parent signs it and resubmits it. You may also print out what's called the student aid report and write in the corrections and mail them in. Again, as with anything manual, it will take longer for processing. So the Fafsa pretty much, doesn't take into account real life. It's really your income, your assets, your household. It doesn't look at, anything that's going on. So schools are allowed to look and to determine, can we do what's called a special circumstance or professional judgment review to determine, we can't change your EFC, we're not allowed to do that, but can we change the data elements on the Fafsa to recalculate the EFC? What you would do is you'd send a written explanation to the college. Do not submit documentation right away. You send a written explanation of what your situation is, and the school will say, okay, yes, we can pursue this further, send us X, Y, and Z. Another school could say, thank you for pointing this out, we're not going to be able to pursue this further, and that's perfectly allowed. The Department of Education just tells schools we have to entertain the thought of doing a professional judgment review, but we set the criteria of what is and what isn't, and it could differ from school to school. And that it does happen. You'll see some of the circumstances where it does happen. These are the most common special circumstances we see. Unfortunately, if a parent dies, that's pretty much a given across the board. Every school will do something for that. Medical benefits, uncovered medical benefits that are not covered by insurance. I'm going through one of these right now with a family who, had a lot of medical expenses they paid, but they keep submitting to me explanation of benefits from their insurance company. That doesn't tell me how much they actually paid. So if you do have some medical expenses that you paid over, this past year, and you have the receipts for them, make sure you have them ready if you got a request to have a review of the financial aid package. What you paid out of pocket after insurance. If a parent loses employment or has been underemployed, schools will look at that. There could be some differentiation here. If you lost employment involuntarily, pretty much I know every school will say, okay, send us all the documentation. Every school looks for something a little different. Could be unemployment benefits, letters of separation from the employer, last paycheck before you were separated. If you chose to retire, or you chose to not work anymore, or if you were fired for unjust reasons or whatever it might be, some schools may look at that a little differently. If it's like a mass layoff, it's pretty straightforward. But voluntary retirement, some schools will say, okay, we can make an adjustment. Other schools say, okay, you retired, you chose to do that, it'll be reflected in next year's Fafsa or the following year's Fafsa. So not every school will look at retirement the same way. If you have dependent care, whether it's for a child or a sibling or a parent, again, this is after any insurance. You'd have to prove that you made these payments out of your own account. Again, documentation. Secondary school tuition. Obviously you're here because you have a child in a public high school, but you may have another child in a non-public school. If that's the case, some schools will take that into consideration. I worked at 3 different colleges in my life, and one of them I worked at said, you send your child to a non-public school, that's your decision, we're not taking it into account. The other schools I've worked at said, yes, we will take it into account. If for some reason the student cannot obtain parental information, I actually had this phone call today with the guidance counselor at another school. It's a difficult situation. Usually, again, guidance counselors who I'm working with to get things straightened out for the student, but if the student cannot do that, definitely reach out to the financial aid office that the school is attending, the child is going to attend, and talk to them about what they need in order for the student to pursue. They can file the FAFSA without the parent information, but it'll never finalize because the student's not technically considered independent unless the school doesn't override. And that's it's a little tricky. And the one I skipped over was divorce. Now, if the parents are divorced or separated going into the FAFSA, this is usually not an issue or a special circumstance. Because as long as you file your taxes as separate and file on the FAFSA that the parent's marital status is separated, divorced, it's not a problem. Where the biggest problem occurs is when parents are put on the FAFSA that they're separated, divorced, whatever it might be, and the tax returns they file were married filing jointly, or even married filing separately. That's conflicting information, and we have to resolve that. So if the parents are separated, divorced between the time the FAFSA was filed and when the child's attending school, you're going to need to provide documentation to the school proving separate residencies. If it's a divorce with court documents, that's pretty clean. Really, separation is the more difficult one, because you have to prove separate residencies, separate pay stubs, different addresses. A lot of great detail goes into that. So hopefully it's not the case for anybody, but if it is, if something changes along the way, just be prepared for the school to ask for a lot of information for that. So now I'm going to switch gears to the state. So New York State Higher Education offers aid to students who attend schools within New York State, both public and private. These are the major programs that are available to New York State residents. I'm going to cover the four most popular ones, TAP, STEM, and Excelsior, and Enhanced Tuition. So, the rules for New York State: you have to be a New York State resident, both student and parent, for at least 1 year to apply for New York State aid. You have to graduate from a high school in New York State, and you have to attend a school in New York State and be a matriculated student. Each of the programs have their own criteria as well. So the New York State TAP Award, when I was in school 30 plus years ago, I received the TAP Award, so it's been around a long time. Some of the parents in the room, you may have received the TAP Award as well. It's for undergraduate students. The maximum award is $5,665. The minimum award is $500. And this one actually has a magic number tied to it. If your New York State net taxable income is $80,000 a year or below, which is kind of equivalent to about $100,000 federal adjusted gross income, the student will be eligible for the New York State TAP Award. And again, it's a sliding scale. If you write at that, $79,000 New York State net taxable, your child's getting $500. As it gets lower, the amount of the award will increase. It also takes into consideration the cost of the school. So if you're going to get, say $1,000 to, your child's going to WCC, they're going to get a $1,000 TAP award. If they come to a private school in New York State, that might be $2,000 or $2,500 because it costs more to go to those schools. It looks at whether the student's dependent or independent, and it looks at the whole family's income, as the Fafsa does. It takes into consideration how many people are in college in the household, but it doesn't weigh it too heavily. But if you do have more than one in high school, in college, by all means, it'll help you. Now, the big program from a few years back that came out is the New York State Excelsior Scholarship. This is free tuition for any SUNY or CUNY schools. So SUNY is the State University of New York, CUNY is the City University of New York. Free tuition if the household income is under $125,000 federal adjusted gross income. It covers tuition only. So if, student in the room, one of your children look to go to, SUNY Brockport, you're still paying for room and board, you're still paying the standard fees. So it's not a total free ride, it's just for tuition. It's good for the associate's or bachelor's degree, so if you go to WCC, you still could be able to get this award. Now, the two real caveats on this is the academic side first. Students must complete a minimum of 30 credits per academic year to maintain this award. So that's 15 credits a semester. A lot of students in their first year of college, they say, that first semester, I don't want a full course load of 5 classes. I may only take 4 classes. Well, they got to make up that other class somewhere before the year's out, whether it means going, extra classes in the spring semester, going in the summer, or like in the January intersession that some schools have. That's where it's a little more of a struggle for students. As the student progresses, and they're more familiar with college, the 15 credits is kind of the norm, so it really doesn't make much of a difference. But the first year could be difficult. The other caveat on this is after the student completes their education, if you get this award, say, for the full 4 years, you're lucky enough to have it, full free tuition for the full 4 years, student graduates, has a great job offer in, Chicago. They moved to Chicago because they got this great job offer. They have to pay back this Excelsior Scholarship. You have to live and work in New York State for the same number of years you receive the scholarship. So again, if the job offer pays enough, it may not be an issue, but some students starting out, the salary may not be that great. That job offer may not be worthwhile when you have to pay back an extra few $1,000s to New York State. Jokes for parents, that means they may be coming back home to live for a few more years. I mean, you think they're out for good, but they may be coming home. So keep that in mind, but again, it's live and work. It's not just one of the two. Now, for private institutions, there's something called the Enhanced Tuition Award. It has all the same requirements on the front end and back end as far as the financial side, the academic side, the work and living requirements. The big difference is for schools choose to participate in this program. Not all private schools in New York State do, and a lot of them that did no longer do. What happens with this award, this is a maximum state award of $6,000. So if your child's receiving a TAP award for $4,000, they're not getting an additional $6,000, they'll get an additional $2,000 if you qualify. It's It's not a full, it's not, on top of. Also, it looks at any other state aid, so if a student receives anything else from New York State, it subtracts that as well. So it's a little tricky. Schools opt into it. A lot, as I mentioned, a lot of schools that were in it in the beginning did opt out and said, you know what, it wasn't beneficial to us because we had so few students that qualified. The ones that didn't receive a lot of money, especially looking at a TAP award, a full TAP award of $56.65, you're gonna get a $335 grant from New York State. The administrative work that the state side and the school side did not really warrant that staying in the program. So a lot of schools have backed out, and they've normally done and said, you know what, we could figure out if the student would have gotten that extra $335 from New York State, we could give that to the student in one of our own grants. So a lot of schools will do that. But if a school does participate in an enhanced tuition award, there is a separate application that does need to be completed with New York State. Now, the other excellent award in New York State that does not have a financial component, this is strictly academic, is the STEM award. So if a student chooses to major in one of the STEM majors and attends a college in New York, if it's a SUNY or CUNY, they finish the top 10% of the class. And do you rank percentage? I'm not sure if you did. Do you rank students? Okay, so New York State has another calculation they can use, being there's no ranking involved, to determine if the student's eligible for the STEM award. It's again, full tuition at a SUNY or CUNY school. What they did a couple of years ago, they said, we want to keep our students in New York even if they don't want to go to a SUNY or CUNY school. So if a student attends my school as a private institution, they'll pay that student, or pay us, the equivalency of a SUNY tuition if they're in a STEM major and meet the requirements. So your child can go to a private school in New York and receive this grant from New York State. So there's no financial component built into this one, which is nice. Again, it has the same back-end requirements for living and working in New York State as well. Separate application. The one big thing here is that we've seen, again, especially in most recent years, if a student decides to say, you know what, I'm not going to go to college right out of high school, that would automatically disqualify them from receiving the STEM award. It is only for students who go directly from high school to college. There's no gap year involved with this award. Everything else, it doesn't matter when you start. So how do you apply for the New York State aid? When you complete the Fafsa, you're going to get, this is like one of the last pages you'll see after you submit everything. And that little blue thing says start your state application. If you click on that, it'll bring you right to the New York State Higher Education Services Corporation website to complete your application. But it's also right above that, it's tough to read, but if you have more than one child in college in your household, the button above it allows you to have the other child's, your information populated, parents' information populated in the siblings' FAFSA. So it saves you a lot of time. Instead of doing 2 full FAFSAs, you're doing 1.5 pretty much. So it saves you time. This is a pop-up screen. So I've experienced to work with families that once you click something, it goes away and you can't go back to it. Other people, it stays on the screen. So if you have 2 people in your household going to college, always choose that one first, the top one first, because it's a lot easier to do the New York State application than doing a whole separate FAFSA. It takes less time. But if you choose the state one, it'll bring you to this page, which allows the student to create their sign-on username and password to complete the state application. You will need to have the New York State tax returns handy for the student and parent. They've expanded the application. Unfortunately, in the past, it used to be, it would populate all the information, boom, you're done, you sign it, move along. But now it does ask for additional information from your New York State tax return. The big difference is the TAP application, the New York State application, only allows you to list 1 school, not 10. It'll automatically pull in the first school listed on the FAFSA that's in New York State. So whatever that might be, that's how they're going to process your initial award from New York. Once you decide on the school you're attending, you need to go back into New York State's website and change the school code to wherever you're attending. Again, it makes a big difference because the other school, the school you're attending will never get anything as far as a grant if you're eligible for one. So you want to make sure you go back and do that. And schools usually remind you of that as well during the whole process. Now the final application I'll speak of, before I get to the profile, just keep in mind some schools also have their own applications. And I've been at PACE for almost 20 years, but when I worked across the county at Iona, they had their own financial aid application in addition to the FAFSA. So check with each school you're looking at, make sure that they don't have their own application, kind of like As I'm finding out with the Common App, again, you do your essay, but there's also a secondary for some schools. Same thing's true with financial aid. The CSS profile is an additional form that's used by more of the highly selective schools that are spending a lot of their own money in scholarships and grants. Roughly 300 to 400 schools use this across the country. So it's really not a lot if you think about it, but still a decent number. There's the cost for the CSS profile. It's $25 to file it initially, and if you have to send it to more than one school, it's $16 per school. Now, the big difference between the profile and the Fafsa is the profile covers a lot more information than the Fafsa does. Yes, it looks at some of the income and assets, all that, but it does take into account debt. It does take into account the primary residence you live in. I had a coworker recently filling this out, and they're asking, why do they want to know if I have a car loan? Okay, so it goes that deep onto what your finances are. It looks at the bigger picture. If the parents are separated, some schools want the non-custodial parent information as well. When you go to the CSS profile website, one of the things right on the first page is the list of schools that accept or require the profile. Take a look at that. It's in alphabetical order, but you can sort it by a couple of different columns. So you want to take a look at that. Look to see if you're in a situation where you are separated, divorced, if you file the profile, whether or not both parents' information is needed. Because it may be, but not all schools require that. The other thing on the profile we want to look at is some schools accept the profile, they don't require it. And that to me is always like one of those questions, why would you accept it but not require it? What does that mean? Does that mean I don't submit it, my child's not going to be considered for some merit scholarships or need-based scholarships, or they're just collecting it for statistical reasons? So you want to check with the school if they accept the profile but don't require it. Is it worth your investment of $25 or $16? Do you want to spend that time and money filling it out if you don't have to? So you want to make sure that's there. Call school, find out what the requirement is, or if you'd be visiting the school, stop by their financial aid office or the open house, their financial aid table. Everything's in. All your forms are done. You've applied to the school. You got the admissions letter. Congratulations. XYZ. Schools that are listed on the forms will get a copy of them, and they'll start their processing. Most schools try to coordinate the process with your admissions application. So if you do early action, early decision, rolling, whatever the dates are, they try to get the financial aid information out to you at the same time they say you're admitted to the school, if possible. Some schools will then start sending out the requirements they need from you. So if you were selected for that verification process, they'll get that letter saying, in order to finalize your financial aid, we'll need this form, your tax returns, your W-2s, whatever it might be, if you didn't do the data retrieval tool. So you want to make sure that you check all that. Most schools communicate via email. Some will still send an initial award letter in the mail, but a lot of them send an email to whatever email's listed on the Fafsa or the school has for the student, saying, congratulations, your financial aid award letter is now available for you to view. And you go on, you click there, and you follow the instructions. So whatever email you use, make sure that, if the student's in the room, a parent is aware of that email address also, so they can make sure things are being followed. So we'll get something called the financial aid award letter, financial aid award notice, financial aid letter. They have different names. Each school uses a different name for it. But what it basically does, it breaks down the amount of aid you receive from the federal government, from the school. If you're a New York State resident, for the TAP, it'll list an estimate. It won't say what your actual TAP award is, because New York State makes that determination, and they don't do that until April, when they pass their budget each year. So as long as New York State passes their budget by April 1st, soon thereafter, they'll send out notices of here's your TAP award. It'll give you a breakdown of the costs, the direct versus indirect. It should break out the free money and non-free money into two different columns. So your scholarships and grants should be in one section, the loans, work study in another section, and you can figure out, do the math, okay, here's the direct cost, subtract out the free money, and that's what you're gonna owe. Some schools, actually every school in New York State, if you, as a New York State resident, also have to provide you with additional information. Some will do it on the initial award letter, some will send out a secondary award letter that'll include the school's graduation rate, loan default rate, retention rate, average cost over 4 years, as well as some school data that's required for us to allow you to let you know. If you apply to a school out of state, they're not necessarily required to send you that information. Some still will, however. So again, break down the costs, the institutional aid. What will not be on the award letter, most likely for the first go-round, is any talent-based scholarships. So if your child is looking for an athletic award, a theater award, a lot of times schools won't award those until after, let's say for theater, they have to pass an audition. So you may get an additional scholarship after you pass the audition. Athletic awards, there's a national signing date in November where nothing will be awarded before then. So if schools have their financial aid packages ready early, you are not going to have the athletic award on there. That could be a little later on. Same with any of the talent awards, artistic awards, etc. When you get the award letter, look it over. I would always recommend, come up with some sort of comparison chart for yourself. Look at the direct costs, make an Excel spreadsheet, direct costs, free money, do the math, what's the difference? And then take into account anything else that you might have to help pay for the college. Don't be scared by the sticker price, so to speak. When you see, one we got, I'll call them out, you probably got some of these at home. Boston University is a tad under $80,000 a year, okay? But they claim they meet 100% of need. So after they use the CSS profile to determine that. So if you have a lot of need, you're not paying $80,000, that's the sticker price. After financial aid, what is that price? So $80,000 is that cost of attendance, which includes the indirect expenses. You want to figure out what part of that is direct, take that, subtract out all the free money you get, and that's how much you expect to pay. Before I get to questions, one thing about loans I did not cover is there are loans that are out there that are not federal loans, they're private education loans that you probably see advertisements for. You're probably getting advertising already, spam emails for different companies. Some are major, some are small. If you need to finance the education outside of the aid you're receiving, and you kind of want to avoid that federal parent loan, check with the school to find out if they have a payment plan. Because a lot of schools do have payment plans where you can pay whatever's due over a 10-month period. Some schools a full 12-month period. Some break it down by semester. Or if you're looking for other means of paying through loans, there are alternative loan programs out there that look at the student primarily, the student's name primarily, but the student would need a cosigner. And this is a full-fledged credit check. They're looking at credit scores, debt, income, to determine what your interest rate will be. Those interest rates right now, we get the updates. Some of them are under 4%, but the high end is 16 or 17% if you qualify. So figure out which one's best for you. Again, it would be in the student's name with the cosigner. A few of them have loans that the parents can take out for the student. I would say check with your local whatever bank you deal with or credit union you deal with to see if they have a program. They may have some back-end benefits where if you pay directly from your checking or savings account for the loan, they'll knock 0.25% off the interest rate or 0.5% off the interest rate. So always check there first. You'll get more information on all of the financial aid options once your child's been accepted, have the financial aid award notices, and as you get close to May 1st, of course, the acceptance date, that's really when it cranks up. But take advantage of, right now, you open houses, talk to the financial aid offices, virtual and in person. Come in spring when they have accepted student events, take advantage of those. Financial aid becomes much more involved at that point, so we have actual numbers to talk about. We have an award letter, we have actual costs, and we can go over all the details at that point. So definitely look forward to that. So that's a lot of information in just under an hour. So I'm here for questions. I'm not going to run out the door, because I know some people don't like asking questions in front of the audience. I'm not going to run out the door when we're done, but by all means, fire away. Yes, ma'am.
You were talking about the 529s. You're saying that, so say there's a grandparent that opened a 529 for your child. You're saying that you don't have to put that on the FAFSA?
Correct. If the 529 is held by anyone outside of your household, it does not get reported on the FAFSA.
So then when the child applies for school, the money in that 529 though is going to pay toward the tuition.
Correct.
Right? So that's fine.
That's fine, but it said next year when you file the FAFSA, that's going to be recorded as untaxed income towards the child because it's a gift from the grandparent.
How does it get, you put that in?
You have to self-report that on the FAFSA.
Is there a minimum amount?
Now, the question on the FAFSA is any.
$500?
Exactly. Any funds you receive that were not from work or from your immediate family is considered gift aid, and it's a line on the FAFSA to report that. So in subsequent years, it'll be used. Yes, sir.
What if your 2021 taxes are on extension?
Good question. If it's 21 taxes, you will use estimated numbers on the FAFSA. I would still try meeting the deadline. Check the school's deadlines. You don't want to miss the deadline for, while waiting for your taxes to be complete. So if it's close to your 2020 taxes, try using that information as best possible, but definitely get the form in. What will happen is, once you complete your taxes, some schools will actually come back and say, we want, here's your tentative financial aid award. We will not finalize it until we have a FAFSA with completed tax information. Some schools will say, whatever's there, we'll move forward with them, and that's okay. But be prepared to update the FAFSA once you have the actual taxes. Now, if you have more than 10 schools on, it could be a little tricky. So hopefully the taxes are done after your school number drops below that 10. So you don't have to do it multiple times.
If you did the autofill, would it bring up the 2020 taxes?
No, the autofill, the data retrieval tool will only pull in the year that's required for the FAFSA.
Okay.
Yes?
Hi, so on the 529, you said if it's not in the child's name, you don't have to report it?
You do report it, but it gets reported as an investment for the parent, not the child.
Even though it's in the child's name?
Even though it's in the child's name, correct. Yes?
Are unvested options considered assets?
Was that?
Are unvested options considered assets?
Anything's considered an asset in the parent's name as long as you have access to it. So traditionally, yes, it would be. Things that's a little tricky is when you get to like the UGMA accounts, UTMA accounts, it's kind of in both names of the student and parent. I always say report that as a parental asset, not as a student asset. Anytime it has two names on it, the student name and the parent name, always default to the parent, because again, it was weighed much less heavily by the federal government in the calculations. Yes?
Hi, so that was gonna be my question. So if all the accounts for my son in both of our names, so I report that under me, not under my son?
Correct. Now, with the filing of assets, the FAFSA asks a question, so this is what we get, depending on your situation. Once all the financial aid is financial information is put in for the tax return, it's going to ask a question about your investments. They do a calculation internally based on all your other answers saying, do your investments exceed this dollar amount? And if they don't, you don't have to report any of them. But if it does, that's when you have to list, according for the student and parent.
And this is your 401ks or?
Not the 401k. 401k is not reported anywhere on the FAFSA. It's the pre-tax contribution to the 401k, which is nice. It's not going to penalize you for doing the right thing for your retirement.
What if your 401ks are Roth? You don't tax?
That does, I believe, laws are not reported again. Give me 1 second here. Yes, that's considered a non-education IRA, so that's not reported. When you get to the questions on investments on the FAFSA, when you click on the box, this information I have highlighted here in orange, it's what pops up on the screen. It'll tell you exactly what to include, not to include. But any your IRAs that are non-educational are not reported. Educational IRAs are like 529, basically the Coverdales. No other questions. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'll pass the mic back to Aaron for the moment. And again, I'm not rushing out the door, so if you have some questions, I will stick around for a few minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Appreciate all that information. Hopefully, it was very thorough. Again, this recording will be on the district. I said earlier, our counseling page will be on the district page, so you'll click the link and the recording will be there. If you ever want to review it, we will have the slides that I will post on the counseling site. So again, thank you all for coming out tonight, and appreciate you being here. Next week we do a little plug for another college program. Next Thursday night, 7 o'clock here in the auditorium, we will have college representatives from Manhattanville, from a school down the road called Pace University, here to discuss and talk about college admissions. University of New Haven as well. So representatives will be here, and we can have a nice conversation about college admissions for those interested in learning a little bit more about the process. So again, thank you for being here.